Hey everyone, how's it going? Azren, the language nerd here. Hope you're doing very, very well. Sitting here in my car as per usual. I have to teach a bunch of classes in the next hour and a half. And so I thought I'd take some time to make a video right now, make a podcast, and take this little gap of time to create some content. And I want to talk about something which could potentially be slightly controversial in many respects, or in some respects. And it's around, should teachers be allowed, or should teachers be teaching a foreign language class if they do not have excellent or perfect pronunciation in that language? The first thing I want to say is a bit of an empathetic statement, a statement with some empathy behind it. I understand that there are a lot of teachers who are many teachers who are teaching a language such as English or French or Spanish or whichever language. They're teaching a language and they're teaching it because they've been put into that position. So for example, in Calgary, often teachers will get a job teaching, for example, French, even though the teacher isn't necessarily super duper fluent in French. Maybe the teacher has a certain background. They took some high school French, they took it in university, and they have a decent level, but the teacher themselves, they got a job teaching French even though they're not super well grounded or super knowledgeable or an expert, a quote unquote expert in teaching the language, let alone speaking the language, right? And so that, I understand that happens. I've worked with people like that. I've seen that happen a lot. And in those kinds of scenarios, you're in a bit of a pickle. You're in a little bit of a difficult scenario where you don't really have a choice. You're teaching a language, your pronunciation is not perfect, it's okay, but you have a thick accent, you don't really understand the pronunciation rules, and it's a different topic, but you might not even fully understand the grammar and fully understand really a lot of the vocabulary you might be needing to teach this language, and on and on and on and on and on. I understand that this is something that happens, and in those kinds of scenarios, I mean, I think you are kind of stuck and you've got to do the best job that you can do. You've got that. It's really all I can say. Now, for me personally though, if we're going to go more on an ideological level and not so much on a practical, realistic level of what does happen many times on a day-to-day basis across the world, if we're going to go ideological, I think it's incredibly important for a teacher to have excellent pronunciation. Let's look at myself, okay? Whenever I take a language class, whether it's for French or Spanish or for whatever, when I take a foreign language class, it's a big turnoff for me personally if the teacher does not have perfect or at least excellent pronunciation. It doesn't necessarily bother me, but boy, will I start looking for another class, start looking for another teacher. The reason for that is for myself, and this is for me personally, I believe it's important for me to sound as close as possible to a native speaker as I can. I want to sound, when I say the word apple in French, and we take a French guy or French girl, put them beside me, and they say the word apple, I want it to sound identical, if it's not identical, at least very, 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 very close. I want to be able to speak that way. I think that people view you differently. They view you in a more positive light if you're able to pronounce the sounds properly, say them well, have a decent accent. I think you're viewed more positively. I think it opens more doors. I think it helps you to have more natural conversations with people. I also think that if you have a good pronunciation, it means that you have an excellent or a good understanding, a solid understanding of the sounds behind that language, meaning that listening comprehension becomes simpler. Because if you have really atrocious pronunciation in a language, there is a very good chance you do not actually understand the intrinsic, the detailed phonetic differences between what you speak and the language that you are trying to learn. The result of that is when you're listening to people speak, you have not trained your ears to be able to hear the new sounds in that new language, which makes it impossible or very difficult. It complicates the process for you to understand. And the reason for that is because as adults, what happens is that we train our ears to listen to the sounds of our mother tongue, the language that we speak on a day-to-day basis with our families, with our work, coworkers, friends, etc. And anything that's foreign, we might not be able to accurately identify and hear it as it should be heard, and it becomes difficult for the brain to process. And so having a good pronunciation often means that let's say there's a direct correlation between having a good pronunciation and being able to really have a good understanding of the sounds of that language, which then helps you in listening comprehension and a variety of other things. So for me personally, I think it's incredibly important. And if someone, I think on an ideological level, I do not think it's a great idea for someone to be teaching a language if they do not have excellent pronunciation or perfect pronunciation. On an ideological level, on a high level, up in the clouds kind of level, I don't think it's a good idea. And to go one step further, I even think that if you are teaching a language, I really think it helps if you as the teacher have some level of understanding of the unwritten pronunciation rules. What I mean by unwritten pronunciation rules is the following. In English, everybody knows that we have 26 letters? Yes, 26 letters. Everybody knows this. However, we don't necessarily have only 26 sounds in English. We don't. We have way more than that. The letter A can say ah, the letter A can say the letter A can be like there's a variety of ways to pronounce the letter A. The letter B says buh, yes, but if we have a word like lamb, L-A-M-B, we don't say lamb buh. We don't say that. And so I do think that if you have at least a adequate knowledge of some of the unwritten or the unconscious, or let's say the phonetics, the phonetic knowledge of how the language works, I think that can help you tremendously because you can break that down for your students. One thing that happens with many people who learn languages is they don't understand the sounds of the language because their teacher didn't know. And as a result, they have maybe an accent in the language or poor pronunciation because no one ever taught them that, we don't say, as a Chinese speaker, we don't say email. We don't say email. We say email with a dark L. Most English teachers are not teaching this dark L, at least that I've seen. Most English teachers I've seen are not teaching this concept of dark L's and that it's email, not mall, but mall, right? This is not something that necessarily is taught in every single English classroom. Or in Spanish, how many countries will drop the S at the end of every syllable. It's important to know that, even if you're not going to speak that way, it's important to know that as a learner, so that when you hear someone from Venezuela, from many parts of Venezuela, if you hear someone from a lot of coastal regions of Spanish countries, you need to understand that they might say, ¿Cómo está? Not estás, but they'll drop those S's. It's important to know so you can register that and your brain goes, oh, I still understand what's going on. I still understand what's being said. So to conclude this whole video, I understand that in many scenarios, language teachers will be stuck in a scenario, they will be put into a scenario where they have to teach a language, even though they don't necessarily have the deepest knowledge of that language, grammatically, phonetically, pronunciation-wise, syntax-wise, etc. I understand that, and if you're in that scenario, you've just got to do the best that you can. I understand that, no judgment, and I get it. It's really, you just got to do what you can do, right? However, again, like I said, ideologically, if we could theoretically wave some magic wand and change the whole scenario, I do think it makes a significant positive impact for the language learner if the teacher has a deep understanding of how the pronunciation works, to be able to say the sounds properly, and to be able to break that down for students and really break down the phonetics of how that language works. So anyway, let's wrap this video up here. Thank you for watching. I appreciate your attention, and we will talk later. Bye for now, guys. See ya.